and he's free. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this lovely planet. And you are at the right time on the right screen, your screen. And you have the fun that we start off a recap of the year and looking forward to 2026 with a very special guest. I would call him simply Honest John. Because John Reed is famous for talking no bullshit, but when he observes bullshit, he talks about it and he talks, it's like if you put on an open wound a bit of Tabasco. So he enjoys if the pain is going to your face, not for the pleasure of the pain in others, but that he is focusing on the bullshit others are, let's say, distributing. And he has always some very valuable thoughts. And this is the reason why we're looking forward to an exciting hour, which will give us an opportunity to look in a reflection to 2025 and how, for instance, our most interesting topic, as a lot of people have seen the development of artificial intelligence in their workspace, in their environment, in their daily life, and what's coming up. Hello, John, and looking forward to have a fantastic hour with you.
We are really going to have fun because I know the two of you are going to have curveballs. You are not going to accept you're not going to accept bland commentary, and we're going to push each other. And I hope the end result is that we learn something and break through this noise machine. Can we do it?
And as we know that you are a very busy chap these days, and we have to quit a bit earlier and cannot, let's say, run out of time, we would just love to jump in, John. Thomas gave you some hints on some topics which might be a déjà vu out of our famous talks with Dr. Michael Wu, the talks that we had with you and in other constellations. So I'm curious, what was your number 1 to 5 topic in the last year, which you had either a lot of fun with and you enjoyed, or you were in pain?
Even more simpler. Let's start with the simple things, not go into nitty-gritties too early. So this was I think, a defining year in the area of, well, whatever AI is these days. Yeah. And what I'm interested in is if you would give the year a moniker, a name, some descriptor of what is defining or what was defining that year. What was it? What would be the moniker?
Well, I think the year for AI, if I take like a customer enterprise perspective, is kind of like, what the hell do I do? Like I want to say, I really wanted to come here today and say this is the year where we started to see project results and all of that. And look, we did see some project results this year. And to be clear, and I just got off of over the holidays, I got my next AI certification, which was on machine learning. And there's a lot of machine learning in businesses that's pretty mature, so we have to be a little bit careful with this topic, right? Like when we're talking about sort of the new AI, the agentic stuff, and the generative AI that powers that. That's kind of the stuff that was a little bit overwhelming, I think, for customers to absorb this year. The gap is the other big thing. There was a very, very persistent gap between what vendors were presenting and what customers were really ready for. And one of the most common things I heard on the ground, because as you know, I got on some planes last year to try to figure out what's what I would hear would be not so much that I don't like my vendor's vision for AI and agentic AI and all of that. It was, I liked it, but I don't really know how to get there. Oh, and by the way, I have these other problems I'm dealing with. And so I feel like it was a year of promise and disconnect. Outside the enterprise space specifically, there was a lot, I think, of momentous things that happened in AI. But I do want to point out that I don't think AI was the only thing going on last year of note. But yeah, as far as the AI piece of it, I wanted to say this was the year of AI results, and there were some, and we definitely documented some of that on Diginomica. But when I did my roundup of AI projects for the year, there were some great lessons, but there weren't as many slam dunk stories as I was hoping for.
That I can directly reflect to that. I was hoping for more last year. So 1 year ago, I was hoping for more this year.
Yeah.
And, well, as you took the Brohammer point of view, let me get back on the ground for once, not being too much of the contrarian. So what I think is that this year we came away from experimentation, actually. So we have seen first steps into value. First steps, not enough, but first steps. So basically, well, from a customer point of view, from an implementer point of view, there in simple scenarios actually seems to be some value, or was achieved some value. And what I liked as well is that some vendors tried experimenting with outcomes in their pricing models, which was kind of a defining moment for me. Seeing that they are actually starting to try to attempt to get a bit of skin in the game instead of only shoving it down customers' throats and, well, opening their own purses so that they can catch all those dollars.
So I think what's really interesting is that if you're a customer right now, why would you say, I'm having an issue with my business. I want to use the most expensive, unproven, probabilistic technology with the most ethical and risk areas to solve my problem. That just doesn't make any frigging sense.
No.
And I still don't
said.
And I still don't think vendors have really gotten this right. And the one thing I really wanted to talk about in terms of last year, that there's really two things, but the one thing I really wanted to point out that really struck me last year is, do you guys remember, it wasn't all that long ago, where we would be like, is transformation something that's being pushed by vendors, or do customers actually care about it? This was a genuine issue, especially in Europe, but I would also see it, for example, in smaller manufacturers in the US, where I would go to shows and they'd kind of be like, I'm doing the same as I've always have, right? Well, to me, that's the thing that has really changed with customers is everyone feels some level of disruption right now. And so vendors don't have to sell disruption for one, because customers are owning that more. Now, they may not necessarily be saying, oh, that means I'm going to buy your solution to solve my problem. They might not even be ready for that yet, but they're owning that they need to change in this world. And I think the other thing that's coming out is they realize I gave you a hard time during the promo about predictions, Thomas, because I think what customers are realizing is they can't predict circumstances that are coming up, but they do realize that they're living in an unpredictable, volatile world. And what they're realizing is that their systems are not secure enough, resilient enough, and adaptable enough for the business problems that they're facing. And they're also, for lack of a better way of putting it for CRMKonvos, they're not end-to-end enough. Like they don't have enough visibility and connection between how they're serving their customers and what their supply chains tell them. And so they're realizing that they have this problem. And, in a past years, I talked about this notion of continuous everything. Like, not that the customers can be planning continuously all the time, but in a way, that's the goal, the continuous close, the continuous plan, like being much more versatile in how you approach market conditions. Customers want their software systems to do that first and foremost. And on some level, they don't even give a crap whether that's AI or the metaverse that's doing it or whatever's doing it. And of course, it won't be the metaverse. We all know that. But that's what they're really looking for, is systems that can move at the speed that they're dealing with now in a way that helps them to automate where they need and to get the talent they need. And they have both of those problems at the same time, usually talent and automation, by the way. So now there is a separate AI conversation, which we can talk about in a sec, that comes from executives getting infatuated with the technology. But when you step back, that's really what customers care about, is competing in this world. And then the really exciting stories, and I don't know if you guys agree with this or not, but the exciting stories are the customers that are making progress on that journey, and they're figuring out how they want to compete in their industry. And in a CX context, for example, we can't be Amazon, we can't be Walmart, but what can we be? Can we compete against that effectively? And when you talk with customers that are having those conversations and their leadership seems to know what they're talking about, to me, that was the highlight of my event experiences last year, was customers that were really looking at how they could really reinvent and compete in a new way, treat their people well, treat their customers well, and use the technologies as subservient to those goals.
That's a lovely observation, a very honest one, and one I would like to share, in the way of that a lot of mom and pop shops have tried to enable themselves to deliver more with the same amount of effort and be more emotional, be more effective, and utilize technology as an enabler, not as the big disrupting, and to give some love and care to their existing customers and potential new customers.
Right.
And by delivering some of the smart ideas and having these benchmarks like the Amazons and the Walmarts in a smaller environment, to survive, to compete, and to be clever and utilize the tools you have to be a bit smarter and to outsmart the big ones in a certain degree. That is what I have seen, observed, and what I love to see. And to see that some big names have remembered, such as that small little company out of Waldorf, that they do have a CX tool. Yeah.
Right.
Even that they love to neglect it. But there are some customers outside which have seen what they can do if they focus to their customers again, in conjunction with that tool.
Yeah, and in the B2B space, obviously, what you're seeing more and more is B2B companies realizing that they can't outsource CX to their external partners, right? That everyone is going to have some kind of direct to customer play, or their suppliers are their customers or whatever. So in a certain sense, it is a little bit of a golden age of CX, in that there's no vendor that can say, "Oh, we don't care about CX," right? That's taking ownership of that and learning how to serve your customers is huge. But when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how this opens up a couple of pathways towards doing AI and doing AI too, because there's a philosophical stance that companies need to take on how they want to treat their customers, employees, and how they want to compete. And that's really important, because AI can either enable that as one of the enabling technologies, or it can conflict against that, right? Because we're seeing a lot of companies using AI, and I would argue in many cases misusing the technology. for much more aggressive headcount reduction, operational efficiency schemes. And it doesn't always seem to me that they're clear on how to use the technology to compete effectively. And one of the things that I'm most hoping for this year is that we see some clarity around different models of how to use these technologies with really different approaches to serving customers and employees, because we know how Amazon operates. We know what their culture is about. We know how they treat their delivery and logistical operations and their people, for better and for worse. And they're a giant. They're a behemoth. But how do you compete against that and take business away from that, or have a different model? And that's what I'm really hoping for. And that's when I get energized about AI conversations, because then it's about how to apply that to the stance you take. But I think the companies that don't take a strong stance and then they just take their cues from the executives, like, oh, what are we doing about AI? Those are the ones that are going to get in a lot of trouble, because what we're seeing again and again is vendors bragging about AI. Oh, we reduced headcount with AI or whatever. And then behind the scenes, you find out that they're having to compensate for that, especially for more complex workflows, because the technology isn't ready to do everything that vendors want it to do. And
Right.
and one of the reasons that I find this fascinating is that the more I get under the hood in the technology, the more I realize its inherent limitations at this point in time. And these are not things that are going to get solved mostly in 2026. But the inherent limitations doesn't mean that it's not a very useful technology. It just means there's limitations. And I think, that's where companies are going to get into trouble, because the executives who don't understand the tech are taking their cues from vendors who don't understand the tech, who have crushes on the frontier model guys because they think the frontier model guys are the greatest guys who ever walked the face of the earth and invented the most incredible things. And look, the technology is pretty amazing at times. I've used it, but to my advantage. But like, to worship these guys as like gods, basically, a business, when they haven't even figured out how to turn a profit, seems a little premature to me. And but that's where the enterprise leaders are taking their cues. There's kind of a domino effect where everyone is saying, "What are we doing about AI?" And that's totally the wrong question.
What I honestly was extremely positive of is our conversations with Nicolas France and with Christy Tupper, where they were both giving us very live, vivid, and optimistic utilization of their AI usage to deliver benefit to others.
Right.
And the small boutique approach to deliver more benefits for the same amount, that was overwhelming positive.
John, a bit earlier you said something like they don't care anymore about the technology or whether there's AI in it or not. And I would put that even a little stronger. They shouldn't need to. What is interesting for a user buyer is the outcome, the result. And they shouldn't care a flying F, should need to care a flying F how this is done, as long as the outcome for them is there and achieved. So this is something that the vendors really need to understand. So quit talking about the shiny object, talk about the results, and then just shrug it off. Of course, this is AI, but who cares?
Don't put it into for sure. And I wish that we could just see it that way. The problem is there's so much pressure and on executives right now, and there's this whole AI first kind of mentality, and the problem I see is that you have a real fork in the road philosophically, like I said. And when I talk about how you want to treat your employees, part of that is, do you want a digital surveillance workplace where all the digital exhaust of employees is used to make them feel like they're under surveillance and under constant pressure? And you see examples of this, like Meta telling its metaverse employees that they need to 5x their productivity, right? As if this technology can 5x your job, which it cannot in most cases. I mean, there are exceptions, but that's a lot of pressure, right? And so you have to really think about how you want to present that. And I call it the paradox of AI leadership, because what I say is you need to be more results driven than ever before, but you also need to be willing to get under the hood and understand this technology a little bit better, because when you do, you will make better decisions about the pros and cons. Now, one of the things that I think was really interesting, and just to give you all a sense of this, I'm a real geek about this technology. So I study like the trend of artificial intelligence. I study like causal AI, which is not at scale right now, but which is fascinating. And it's not really connected to LLMs too much. And in a general intelligence pursuit, a lot of the deep thinkers in the AI field are a little bit disillusioned with LLMs. And the reason is because there's a limit to language as a form of intelligence. And animals have very deep forms of intelligence, for example, whereas they have very little language. And if you listen to Jan LeCun's talks, Turing Award winner, he's spending a lot of time on building world models right now, because he's looking at how children learn and how much they absorb about the world before they say a single sound, right? And the difficulty in predicting complex environments. And so to think about it this way, for example, like if I'm a human and I've never touched a hot stove before, I don't need to touch a hot stove, put my hand on a hot stove 1,000 times to know that it's a hot stove, right? Humans can adapt very quickly to new and generalized situations. That's not something that this technology is very good at right now. So the reason I'm getting into that is because one of the things we've learned this year in the enterprise that I think is promising is that quality data from your domain helps so much to get the most out of the technology that's currently available. So there is this emergent AI readiness that's happening now, where what you realize is that AI may not always deliver full value, but it's provoking the best conversations inside of organizations. Because to do this, you have to have a deeper collaboration between finance, HR, CRM. You have to have a data conversation. You have to have a process optimization conversation. You should have been having these conversations years ago. Like Rebecca Wedeman wrote in Diginomica about how we need new metrics now to measure outcomes, like you were talking about, Thomas. And I was saying in my comment in Hits and Misses, we've needed these new metrics for years. Like, don't give AI credit for these new metrics, but AI is forcing the conversation. And I think that's really beautiful. And what the smart organizations are starting to figure out, and what we did see at Diginomica this year, is the smart ones are understanding this AI readiness thing. And so what they're doing is they're investing in these data and process projects on the way to better AI. And here's the kicker, they're getting momentum from the results of those projects. And so, Thomas, even though there's not a ton of great agentic results that we were kind of maybe hoping for, we did see a lot of data and process improvement projects that went really well for companies. And that really builds the right kind of momentum to then figure out how to apply the more probabilistic layers and to think about the use cases and to start experimenting. Because the really fascinating thing about AI is that it's a much more iterative approach. You always have to be testing the data and testing what you're doing with it. And it's so different than the waterfall enterprise legacy projects of building towards this go live that and then handshakes and smiles and all of this stuff, right? And there's still going to be a little bit of that in the enterprise, but so much of the AI influences around this much more iterative approach to project design. And I think potentially that could be very, very healthy if the right stakeholder groups are involved in all of that. And so to me, if I want to get optimistic about it, I like the conversations that are being forced by this technology. And I think that's the healthiest thing to come out of this.
Very interesting to see. You see those aspects. I would like to come to an aspect which is been part of our conversations, such as cost effectiveness, energy efficiency, and working in some honest frameworks as commitments, such as the EU AI Act or their American pendants. And those were, let's say, put in place, and there was somebody coming around the corner and said, get off with that shit. Yeah. Call the president of the United States. And what is making me nervous is that we have that shake-up moment last year, just a year around, when DeepSeek told them all a friendly lesson, such as you do not need the nicest, highly sophisticated gear to achieve some stuff.
Yep.
What's your take on that one?
Well, right. So at the beginning of the conversation, I alluded to the fact that there were some very, very significant things that happened in AI that were a little bit outside the enterprise domain. And a couple of the big ones were GPT-5, which was hugely important in terms of how underwhelming it was, pointing to the limits of so-called scale to get to so-called intelligence, which has been a lasting lesson we could talk about for a long time. But DeepSeek was another one because it implied that there could be a real commoditization around this technology and the potential to do a lot more for a lot less, which potentially could be pretty disruptive. Now we can debate on how disruptive it could be because in a way, okay, maybe NVIDIA doesn't sell as much of their top line stuff, but maybe they sell more stuff to more people ultimately in smaller deals. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that the giants are completely screwed by this thing. But I do think what we are going to see is LLMs themselves becoming something of a commodity, and that what the market impact of that will be is one of the big, potentially a little bit scary questions of next year, right? Because I think a lot of us, including myself, I'm not going to lie about this. I'll just be honest. I'm a little torn between wanting to see these companies get a little bit of a comeuppance, versus wanting to see the economy collapse around me, which I don't want, So I'd like to see that these companies they're not going to get regulated to satisfaction. Okay. But Europe will be a really interesting test to watch. But these companies have shown very resourceful at kind of circumventing all kinds of regulatory stuff. And they're certainly doing that in the US. But I think there could still be some market corrections as far as competition, and China will be significant there as well. I don't subscribe to the arms race thing so much because I think that what DeepSeek generated is that with ingenuity and sometimes constrained resources, you might get huge breakthroughs. And so I'm not so sure that the deepest pockets are the ones that are gonna lead the way forward in all the AI breakthroughs that come from here. But nevertheless, that was a really healthy disruption because it showed us we can do a lot more with less. And if you look at some of the enterprise vendors that have done really well, they've taken pages from that book. I mean, all of us have spent some time studying Zoho, for example. And Zoho's one example of a company that has spent a lot of time with smaller models. And I published some conversations last year, and you guys probably did too, around just how precise they're being with that. Like they're experimenting with exactly what size model do I need for this kind of process or this kind of task. And it turns out that for a lot of enterprise grade use cases that are much more specialized, you don't need a big model anyway. And that's really encouraging from an environmental perspective, especially because we haven't even talked about the collateral external environmental damage that we're enduring with this technology that I do think needs to be talked about. But obviously one way to combat that is to streamline the costs of doing these things. And the energy consumption. So smaller models and stuff like that could be very effective. Now, sometimes smaller models, as Zoho's learning, like don't do everything you want from an LLM. And like for example, smaller models don't necessarily have the semantic sophistication. So like from a customer service perspective, for example, a smaller model might struggle more if I'm using words that are different but mean the same thing. A larger model's probably got a better chance of making the semantic connections that are the facade of understanding that's fooling people into thinking they're super intelligent. But it is a real type of understanding as far as like, hey, John just said something, but that actually is the equivalent of that he is asking about some inventory item, and I know that. sometimes larger models are better for that. But anyway, vendors like Zoho are getting very, very specific around what type of model that they need. And I think that's really encouraging. I think DeepSeek really, kind of spurred a lot of that, I think.
Yeah. DeepSeek basically triggered the commoditization of models.
Yeah.
By showing this is, it's advanced technology, but it doesn't need to be that expensive. It's like oil, just there. And
now, OpenAI, of course, in particular, is deeply threatened by the commoditization of that, and so it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I mean, what I liked hearing about is some U.S. officials saying, "Well, let the market decide." So the thing I like about that is if OpenAI is right that it's really on the inside track towards AGI, show us what you got. Like, show us the next generation stuff. Show us that it's not a commodity. Now, granted, they've done some things with user experience and user adoption that are not commodified, but I would say that's a small moat, not a large moat. That's just monthly user subscriptions. That's not some massive protector against innovation. And many people have said that Gemini is kind of surpassed. And then, of course, a lot of people prefer Claude for code or whatever. So let the market decide. But then sometimes, getting back to Ralph's concern around regulation, you're starting to see these questions around, like, how will this be enforced, and will a company like OpenAI try to get in protection from the government? Too big to fail. You can't let us fail, because if we fail, we'll lose ground against China and selling that kind of like rationale, and then they'll be protected. And so that's one of the things to kind of watch this year. And but that's not ultimately the biggest concern for enterprise customers. Obviously, for enterprise customers, it's really about how do we get the most out of these technologies. And obviously, we can't like cover that in complete like fullness in this one conversation. But I think that's why you guys are going to have a lot of great shows this year, is because you're going to have a chance to pull people on to talk about how they are deriving value. But the short version from what I'm seeing is that it's very much compound architectures that are working, where agentic AI components and LLMs are being integrated into other kinds of process flows that include other pieces of the puzzle. So that make, so you're incorporating different database tools through quote unquote tool calls, and it's not just a standalone LLM that you're working with. And so one thing we're not going to see, if you want to talk about predictions next year, we're not going to see everyone having their own personal assistant, which is the wet dream fantasy a lot of these companies like.
Not.
We're not going to have that, because the technology isn't savvy enough to go into all the different domains. Like, you're not going to have one interface that books your travel and that files your invoices and that manages your supplier relationships and all that. You're not going to have that. That's not for 2026. Sorry, go cry somewhere if that's what you wanted.
In the consumer market, I actually think will not happen for the midterm future, for the very simple reason that one will be willing to pay for it. And vendors are going where the money is. So they are going to the businesses, who then create something they call my personal shopping assistants, which is actually their shopping assistant, not mine. This is the spending a bit more.
There's a whole lot of obstacles to it, and but what's really interesting is that in the enterprise setting, the things that I saw that I got the most excited about were just much more focused than that. For example, I was looking at this one industrial AI vendor that had a series of supplier related agents that could evaluate suppliers, onboard suppliers, and they were orchestrated around a collection of agents just to do that one thing. And then I did a video with Eversort around their document intelligence features and how they spin up these smaller models only with your documents, and then they can go through these documents and redline them and spot discrepancies and errors, and even like handwritten clauses were recognized, which would never have been recognized in the past, right? And so this is the kinds of things that customers have to be asking, which is what I asked in the video, which is like, how is this better than the OCR that I've had for years, right? Why would I want that? And in these focused domains, and what you find is that the domain expertise is there, and then and then really smart discussions around how much autonomy that these processes should have, and in these focus domains. So, for example, another vendor that I did some work with, Auditoria, did some pieces on them. They focus on the degrees of autonomy and letting customers dictate how much autonomy they want over the accounts payable agentic automation that they have there. And again, we're able to answer my question on video of why is this different than different forms of automation we've already had in the past. And so what you're seeing are these increases. But I think, Thomas, you pointed out recently in a blog post that this is not the kind of stuff that gets markets excited, because this is not like trillion-dollar capitalization kind of stuff. But I also get really mad at my colleagues, like when they dismiss this as what they call enterprise incrementalism. I think that's crap. This is actually promising stuff that allows you to build confidence in actually being successful with these technologies and getting a result. And if you can get a small result, it can start to build from there. And the ability, for example, to start, redlining all of your contracts, the money and time saved from that at a big organization, it is going to start piling up pretty impressively, pretty quickly. And so I hate that enterprise incrementalism stuff, because what do you want? Do you want the irresponsible stuff that you read in the consumer headlines every day for these unregulated companies like X starting to expose like weird pornography in front of brands and stuff? Like, is that what you want? Is that the unfettered innovation that you want in the enterprise? Is that the brand exposure that you want?
I prefer
censorship, which is more good.
What's that?
It's free speech, man. You are the American, not I.
Well, yeah, I mean, whatever.
Censorship.
Well, and look, I mean, we could have a debate about that. That's fine, whatever. But the point is that most companies don't want that. Like, they don't want that kind of, like, what happened to my AI? What did my AI do today? Like, it did what? Like, wait, like ChatGPT, for example. Like, how would you like to run a company where you woke up one day and said, "Oh, I got some bad news. Your AI told a few people that they should go kill themselves." Like that's not what I would want to wake up to if I was an enterprise executive. And so I get mad at people who are like, "Oh, the enterprise is approaching AI in too much of a sluggish pace." I mean, look, there are companies that are moving slowly, and there are vendors that are moving slowly. I totally get that. And I think it is confusing for customers to figure out which vendors to align themselves with right now and all of that. We could probably do a whole friggin' episode on that. But the point is that this is the first technology where actually all of those constraints that the enterprise is so good at around governance, security, and risk management are actually really frigging important, and actually add value and don't take it away, which is really different, for example, than the internet or mobile technology, where you could argue that the enterprise was completely slow and slow to adopt, and consumer tech kicked their asses for years on innovation. I don't think consumer AI is kicking the ass of enterprise AI right now. Not unless you accept rampant copyright violations, completely unethical behavior, all kinds of improper exposure. It's enterprise AI that is drilling into the industry use cases and trying to figure out, wait, how can this help busy doctors do their job better, but not put patients at risk? It's enterprises that are trying to solve those problems. Who's not trying to solve those problems? Google, OpenAI, all of them. Why? Because they're going after trillion-dollar markets to prop up these valuations. Exactly. And they're not chasing these more difficult to solve industry problems. So enterprise AI is kicking consumer AI's ass right now. And you can quote me on that. I guess we're live. So
we don't need to quote him. we have it on record.
There are three things I would like to throw into the room, such as the one is I love those specialized, as you mentioned, for instance, Zoho, with some dedicated specialized tools and enabling sets of innovation. I like this in consultation, such as how to become a better call center agent and getting help on the act of delivering benefits to my customer, solving his problem, not learning 500 books, but going through all the documentation with the help of AI to deliver faster problem solving. I would love to see consultation on making salespeople more effective, more driven to succeed in their run for a happy customer and their own bonuses, and to see that the drive we all agreed on when AI approached, which is the elephant in the room, such as to make things better. We have not yet seen that somebody came around the corner in the B2B area and says, I make your shitty data shine. I make it right. And this is my biggest hope for 26, that at least one of the giants can do that little step. Make me smile.
There's some progress there. I've talked with Steve Lucas at Boomi about that, because Boomi's working really hard on some of those problems. And Click/Talon has some interesting stuff there from an analytics standpoint. But you're right. I mean, one of the problems, Ralf, is that we want to automate everything, but a lot of times cleaning data still requires domain experts to get there, to get in there at the crucial point and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is right, this is right. And we want to automate the crap out of all that. And we can't always, but you're right. We do need to do a better job of that. And in general, you could say that if I wanted to criticize enterprise AI vendors, and I do have a couple criticisms of, even though I would say enterprise AI is doing great in some level, like it's also wildly overhyped and also not always attacking the right problems, right? So like a lot of times enterprise AI wants to do the shiny, cool stuff on stage instead of like, how can I make contract negotiations faster? Like, how can I, all the stacks of paperwork you have to finish to deal with me, why can't you expedite that? Like, why can't you make the data quality and integration parts faster and easier for me? So I think a lot of times, Ralf, the enterprise AI vendors, if they could do better, they would focus more on the pain points that hurt customers more instead of what they think is going to be the shiniest, cool, like, sales agent they can show off on stage. But it is really interesting because I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but like, I'll go in a given week or two, I'll have really good and bad experiences with AI systems, like in a matter of days. Like when I was finishing that AI course over the holidays, I had a terrible experience with Coursera's AI-driven support. Like it was just really bad, and it didn't understand that my course didn't have like a forum discussion, and so it kept telling me to go to the forum discussion, which didn't freaking exist for my class. And like to try to tell a bot that is like almost impossible, right? So everyone who fantasizes that bots are great at support needs to reckon with things like that, because even the worst human support representative would eventually understand that. But yeah, yes, they would. They would understand that. They not that humans are always great at support either, but they would understand, this doesn't exist.
But the airline dealing with every now and then now.
Well, some human support's really bad, but that's also something that a company can improve. But anyway, on the other hand, like to finish the course, there was a bot inside the course that was trained only on the course material. And that bot ended up being pretty helpful to me to actually complete the course, because a lot of the documentation was missing, which is why I was contacting customer support. The bot was actually really good for that. And the more concise the domain a bot is trained on, the better a result you're often going to get. And in an enterprise context, that insight can prove incredibly useful for vendors and for customers. But it requires people to behave a little bit, because if I then ask that bot, like, can you book travel for me this weekend, or can you check my Gmail? Like, no, that bot can't do that, but it can do that one thing. It can answer, those questions. And that's where the power of AI starts to kick in, because there was no human helping me. And I ended up feeling really good about my experience, even though I had a crappy experience with the support side bot. The bot in the trenches trained on my domain did great. So, anywho,
for sharing that.
yeah. So anyhow, the only thing we have to be a little careful about is as enterprise practitioners, we have to be a little careful that enterprise scale is different than our own experiences to some extent too. So we have to be a little careful about like, oh, I built this weekend with the bot. I built a website, or I built. That doesn't mean that an enterprise can do the same and have the same success. You might have built a website full of security holes that an enterprise couldn't tolerate. But it was fine for your mother's 50th anniversary party. That just because you could build a website with a bot doesn't mean that a enterprise can do the exact same thing. So you have to be. The reason I mention that is I see a lot of happy talk on LinkedIn around like, oh, I built this weekend. I'm like, okay, well, you're not an enterprise. Like we're enterprise grade people. We have to assess risk management and governance. And Thomas, I think one of the key points you mentioned, and I'll be really interested to see how this plays out this year, is the governance and orchestration piece is going to become more and more important, right? Because notching these individual success stories won't look good unless they add up to some kind of a coherent framework you can build on. Otherwise, the sort of more departmental success stories are going to start to create their own form of chaos. So, and Ralph, which vendors solve those problems are going to be really interesting, because there's a lot of vendors going after that, whether it's the ServiceNows or the UiPath or the Boomies or all the established software vendors in different domains. Everyone's trying to say, we're going to be the platform and we're going to manage all this for you. And it will be really interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, one of the things that this report, I don't call it study, report, this MIT thingy, was totally misunderstood. So the headlines basically, oh, it sucks. However, if you are looking into it, why does it suck? Not because of the technology, but because the ones who are implementing it are implementing the wrong stuff. Yeah. Where it's actually working is where shadow AI happens, where people are helping themselves. So this is what, together with some governance, the implementers, the management teams, the executives should look at is, this is where actually the problems are that my people have. So let's solve them, and not something else that vendor ABC tells me is important to me, and implement that, and nobody needs it. So go after the problems, have some guidelines, guardrails, however you want to call them, put some governance around it, and solve the problems for the people the way they need them solved. So
for Christ's sake, train them, educate them properly, what they can get out of it and what they can't get out of it. So the expectation is properly managed, such as the expectation on when will be the arrival of ROI. What is your assumption on that?
Yeah, look, ROI with these technologies is very much a moving target, because the pricing and the cost of the cost of the underlying technologies haven't stabilized either. So people are going to have to be very careful with how they measure that. And I really liked what Rebecca had to say in a Diginomica thing around the metrics, because I think like how we measure results is going to be really important. What we choose to measure and how becomes really important, because it's not just a money thing. It's we have to really decide what are our crucial industry metrics that we measure our success by. And a lot of the most important metrics are the ones that are harder to measure. We see that, for example, in our own Diginomica business, where it's easy enough to measure page views, but what we're really trying to understand is what do engaged readers do? Like, what do the decision makers in our audience do? How do they behave? And how do we factor into their world and help our clients reach those people? And those metrics are harder. So I think a lot of times with AI, it's going to be the same, where you're going to have to figure out, there's some operational efficiency metrics that might be easier to measure, right? Like time saved, scanning invoices and that kind of thing, right? But the more important things will be things like, for example, CSAT is one example. Like, are you going to use that because you want to serve your customers better than their peers? What metrics are you going to use for that? Is CSAT going to be one of your metrics? And I've gone on these rants before around, saying, well, we replaced a bunch of service people and our CSAT didn't go down. I'm not too crazy about that. I want to see the CSAT go up. Like, I want to see you use these technologies in such a way where you get better, not worse, But granted, I mean, there will be times where people need to transition into new roles. And one of the things I did see this year that I liked is I started to see customers getting more articulate about what their policies were internally. And I'd love to see more of that as well. Like just communicating to employees what their approach to AI is. Like you said, Thomas, do they have sandboxes where people can experiment that are safe and secure, and so that they are kind of cutting down on the shadow AI stuff? Like, have they built that in? I didn't always agree. It was interesting. Some of the customers I wrote about, I didn't agree necessarily with how they messaged AI internally. I thought some of the customers I thought were applying a little too much pressure, like everyone has to use these tools no matter what. Whereas my experience has been that some people do great. Like if you're measuring outcomes, then who cares if they used AI a little bit or a lot? Like I think it's going to vary on teams who gets the most out of these tools and why. But the point is, just articulating your expectations internally is incredibly helpful for your employees so that they know, you know. And if they really disagree with your policies, they can always go to a new employer, but at least they understand what your take on this is and what the future of work in your company is, what kind of layoffs, if any, that they're planning and you can expect. And the companies getting out in front of this and being articulate about this, I think are going to do well. And that's my biggest hope. I mean, I was trashing predictions at the beginning of the show and in the promo, but my biggest hope, if I had to say, not so much a prediction, but a hope for next year, is I hope by 6 months into the year, we're starting to see some examples of the companies that are excelling and how they treat their customers using some of these technologies. And then it won't be every company doing it that way, but I would love to see some shining examples of that to juxtapose against the headcount reduction scenarios and the brute force operational tactics. And let's see. And let the best companies win would be my goal. Now, granted, we're up against a lot of issues there because in some industries like the airline industry that Thomas lovingly referred to, it's maybe a little too monopolistic an industry to truly have, how many airlines are really going to excel in customer experience in the next year? Probably not many, But let's see the shining stories of success of, they're using this technology and their people are happy in their work and their customers are happy with how they're being treated, and it all lines up and the products are excellent and they're executing on all cylinders. Let's see those stories emerge, and that would be great to see even a handful of those as examples of what you can do, as opposed to what I think most companies are going to do, which is either use them for brute force operational efficiency or misuse the tools, fire people, and have to awkwardly rehire them later and issue new headlines. And then, of course, the stories start to come out that actually, after they fired people, they had to hire them back as contractors and all the other stuff that I've been seeing.
Why doesn't the CEO fire himself first, get him, let's say, replaced by a smart AI setup, and take some time off to spend more time on the Hawaiian Islands or Polynesia? Yeah, that is a provocative joke Thomas made one day in a conversation where a lot of analysts were listening and reading. Yeah, so I'm still waiting for that move. It might not be the CEO, but probably in some C area of guiding, leading, and managing to the better of all of the employees and all of the customers, and saving some money where you can really save money in the C level. There, it is really saving money.
Yeah. And by the way, we didn't talk about this at all, but I think there's a lot of fascinating decision intelligence and support scenarios for executives and team leads around these technologies, because that's an area where you don't need deterministic accuracy to have relevant input. And sometimes these machine generated tools offer stuff that you might not really want to hear from your colleagues, but if it comes from a machine, you could say, you could literally go today and say, how could I do my job better with these tools, and get some pretty interesting answers. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but I've done it with Diginomica. I've said, how could we be better? And you get some interesting answers from these tools, and they don't really care about your feelings at that point, even though obviously on a per interaction basis, they're really heavily customized to kiss our asses. But when you ask like a broader question like that, it will give you stuff and that you might not accept from your colleague, but you might accept it from a machine. And that's what gets really interesting, is when the light bulbs go off for this technology, and you're like, hey, we could actually use this to kind of wade through some of the organizational politics and get some clarity on some issues, and get some feedback that our leaders weren't taking before. And then, Ralph, they might not have to be fired.
Yes.
Though I might really want to push them towards more performance-based salary structures, but that's another conversation.
Looking at the time and knowing that you are short of time today,
3 more minutes or so.
3 more minutes means we have one.
How do we do? Check your show notes, Thomas. Did we get it?
Famous last words. Don't know why.
Yeah, I'm just kind of like scanning my notes. I don't think I really have. Wow, we have some interesting background news, huh?
What's going on there in the background? Some bad noise here.
Everybody. Oh, there we go.
Let's mute Ralf. It's usually Ralf.
Sorry, Ralph, you're muted, man. Sorry, man.
There's one of us needs to be blamed, and why not? Right?
Well, I don't have any real last words, except I really appreciate these open-ended conversations without like a real hard, fast structure. And I think like that's what I think we need at events like this, is these open conversations. And the encouraging thing is that the results are there, how you're going to measure them and all of that, but they're achievable. And that's the encouraging part. But we need conversations like this to break through the noise and get there.
Yeah.
And that's
Still, if you had one enterprise AI wish for 2026, what would it be?
One enterprise AI wish.
Wish, not advice. Yeah, wish.
Geez, well, aside from seeing customers getting really good results, I would find it really refreshing to see vendors like on the keynote stage acknowledging the risks of the technology and not just the promise of the technology, and setting a more transparent tone. I thought the keynotes last year were just full of bombast and not very useful. And behind the scenes, we had much better conversations with vendors. And I found myself wishing that they expose that part of themselves to customers more, because customers have the same questions and want to have the same kind of dialogue that we do at some of the analyst gatherings. And I found myself a little bit disappointed by the bombast, because they're trying to sell something that is already sold. Like, no one needs to be sold on, hey, you should take a look at AI this year, So what is the sales pitch on the keynote stage for? Like, why not shift into educate mode? Because education leads to trust, and trust is what leads to AI purchases.
Yeah.
So, and the bombast, I think, is counterproductive. So I'd like to see less of that.
So this now was advice disguised as a wish.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's my wish and my prayer. And actually, it's more of a howl into the wind, I think, because I think the bombast is about to hit, guys. But what can you do? Always
Thanks
a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
And see you soon.
Thanks for keeping me on my toes. Catch you later.
Live and in color. And thanks to the audience too. Thanks to the audience too. And well, tune in next week when we are not 3, but 6 of us, 6 of us, because we are back with our analyst relations panel, analyst relations pros, who are countering us analysts. Sarita Kincaid, Sandy Lowe, Trish Harman, and Ludovic Le Forestier. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Having said that, it's time to say
bye and take care. Till next Tuesday.